Hi, thank you so much for tuning in. What's eminent domain? If you've never heard of that term, I'm going to be breaking it down to you today because it's thrown around a lot in Kenya today with regards to public infrastructural projects, and so that's what I'll be discussing. You're watching On Land in Kenya. I'm Solomon Wangwe. Eminent domain is defined as the exercise of powers or authority by a state government, usually, to acquire private property for public use with or without the private property owner's consent, right? And that just basically means the government's power and authority to take your property forcefully, if necessary, as long as it's being used for public good. And that generally you find happening when the government, for example in Kenya, when they were doing the Thika superhighway or the Eastern bypass and other big infrastructural projects, the SGR, the standard gauge railway, a lot of public space was required to accommodate these infrastructure projects, and because they are deemed as being for the public good, private landowners had to give up their property. Yes, they didn't want to sell it. Probably some of them hoped to be buried on their property or give the property to their children or grandchildren as inheritance or whatever the case may be, but their plans were curtailed because the government said, we need the space, so we're going to take the land. And just to clarify, taking the land doesn't mean that they take it from you for nothing. So legally, the government has to compensate you for the land or the property that they're taking over for the public good. And that compensation has to be in line with market valuation. So they can't just decide, we're taking over your 10 acres and we're giving you 900,000 shillings for the 10 acres. Well, if the land is valued professionally or at the market rate at 900,000, that's fine. But if it's valued for more, then they have to, by law, compensate you in line with that market valuation. So what's the process? Normally, if you happen to own land that the government is eyeing because they want to expand a road, they want to do a pipeline, they want to do the standard gauge railway, or whatever it is they want to do, they will notify you in advance. Typically, they will have public sensitization outreaches. They might do newspaper publications. They will mobilize people on the ground to go door to door and tell people in advance that this is what is happening. It's going to take so long. You should come and participate and find out what's going on. And then they will give you formal notice in writing, explaining how much of your property they want to take, if not all of it, and at what valuation. And that's when you would have an opportunity as a landowner to engage them in a material sense, either to agree or consent to the valuation that they're using to compensate you, or you could dispute that as long as you have reasonable proof for the case that you want to make. And this is not unusual. We've heard of cases in court where a particular landowner took the government or the Ministry of Roads and Transport specifically to court because they wanted to take his property at the southern bypass. They wanted to take his property at a certain price, and he thought it was valued at much higher. So he took them to court, and after a long drawn-out process where he made his case, the court agreed that his valuation was more accurate. So the ministry had to compensate him by giving him more money. So eminent domain is not something to be afraid of. I think as a patriot, we should always be willing to put our own plans on hold or to the side for the greater good of the public. The key here is that it has to be obvious that it's for the greater good of the public. That is a confinement within which the government has powers to exercise eminent domain authority, the right to take over private property for public use with or without the owner's consent. So you need to be informed You can't be hiding in a dark hole or bury your head in the sand like an ostrich. You need to engage, find out what's going on, and be armed with data and knowledge about what your property is worth. In cases where you have buildings on your property, I have a family member who was recently approached by the government for such an exercise, and this family member had built their home, semi-retirement home, and they'd also built some commercial space on a particular section of the property, which was earning them some passive income in rent. And when they came, they handled it very well. From what I got to find out, they actually compensated her at market rate for the land. They compensated her for the value of the building she had put up. And even for the commercial space, they compensated her not just for the cost of construction, but its market valuation. And beyond that, they compensated her for lost income for a period of 1 year. So if you have, say, a block of apartments on a particular property that has to come down because the road has to be widened by the government, they will typically also compensate you for the lost income. Since they're taking over your property and you had counted on the income for however number of years, they will compensate you for the lost income, not necessarily for the full number of years that you expected to collect the income, but for a reasonable amount of time. And that makes it easier for you to move on. So be informed, and don't get scared whenever that term is thrown at you. Imminent domain, the government wants to take over your property. Sometimes it's actually a good thing, especially if it is indeed for the greater good of the public. I hope you have learned something from that. If you have comments, questions, something you'd like to share, please feel free to do so. Our social media platforms are up and running. You can give us a call directly, check out our website, and we'll be happy to engage with you. You've been watching On Land in Kenya. I'm Solomon Wangwe. Stay tuned for more information on strategic land investment.